That's Jesse was saying before you got on, there's almost a political component to using Jitsi instead of Zoom.
Yes, that's true.
It's time for the Access of Easy podcast.
So I'll do a quick intro. This is the Axis of Easy Salon. I am Mark Jeftovic in the west side of Toronto. Up there on our left is Jesse Hirsch from the Ottawa Valley. And our special guest this week is Brenna Smith. She's an investigator of Bitcoin, blockchain, illicit uses thereof. She's an author at Bellingcat and has her own newsletter called CryptOS Int. And we'll get the URLs for those at the end of the show. And thanks for coming on, Brenna.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, and we asked you on partly because I'm a big fan of your newsletter. I read it quite religiously. And one of the things we do here on this podcast is we sort of look at the intersection of technology and politics. While heavy on the technology, the emphasis is on the politics, looking at the way in which the state is changing, the way in which power between governments and corporations is changing, sort of trying to anticipate the way in which social media will be regulated, the way cryptocurrency could be regulated. And for the most of our episodes, we've kind of stayed away from cryptocurrency, and we've really dealt more on the artificial intelligence, the social media, the kind of misinformation, propaganda stuff. And then a few episodes ago, we had Adam B. Lean on, who sort of gave us a good overview of kind of Bitcoin and blockchain. And one of the key sort of insights we got from him was the gap between technology and reality. That, you know, there's a lot of people in the blockchain or cryptocurrency space who have great ideas for apps, for companies, systems, very few actually make it to the real world.
We just lost her. And she's back.
Sorry about that.
How much of that did you get?
I got that you had Adam on, and then it cut out after that.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were just saying the big insight from Adam was kind of the disconnect between theory and practice in the cryptocurrency world. That there's lots of people with great, crazy ideas, but very few make it into reality. Very few startups actually sort of get to a point of maturity. And what I think we kind of wanted to talk to you today was the state-based stuff. So everything from the rise of kind of central bank digital currency, the way in which Facebook Libra is kind of almost state-based currency, or at least threatened states initially and forced states to kind of get their act together. But also, you know, some of the contentious relationships between states in the use of cryptocurrency. So I raised that in terms of broad brushstrokes, but the primary reason we wanted you to have on as a guest was to help us understand this a little deeper, both in terms of the landscape of what should we be paying attention to when it comes to the world of kind of cryptocurrency, states, and regulation. But what are you looking into? What's the stuff that catches your curiosity, and kind of what motivates you in terms of your newsletter to cover the topics you do? And I say this partly because I've personally been a big fan of open source intelligence and the concept of open source intelligence in terms of how anybody, any citizen, any reader, anyone on the internet can, you know, become part of large research efforts, can be curious, feed their mind. And that's really what we do here at the Axis of Easy, under the auspice that we like to make it easy to do so. So it incentivizes people to get into it. So, you know, with that as a broad overview or intro, why don't we start with what are you most curious about right now? What is the general subject or particular subject that you've been reading about lately, or that you think is something that people ought to know about?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Let me know if my connection is wonky. I can move rooms. In quarantine, today is my first day in a new home office. And I am learning from calls this morning that this actually might not be the best internet connection in the world, so sorry about that.
Where are you coming in from?
I'm from the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah, so West Coast, San Francisco area.
Well, you sound pretty good. Jesse's sounding wonky as usual, but he lives in an area of Canada where communications are
Where
delivered
the
by
internet forgot.
carrier pigeon and dog sled are the primary modes of communication in the
Got
Ottawa
it.
Valley.
But yeah, thank you for all the kind words, Jesse. I'm thrilled to hear your um do like the newsletter so much. I'm working on doing some interesting new stuff on it right now. I've moved it from weekly to monthly, which I'm hoping will actually be a good move because I can do more deeper investigative work on a monthly basis versus like a, having like what I found the newsletter was becoming was more being like me being a news aggregator of other people's work instead of producing my own research, which is great, but I work a full-time job outside of this and I have other responsibilities, and I just realized that what I wanted the newsletter to be was original research, and it had kind of devolved away from that. So I'm trying to figure out a happy medium of still getting the biggest topics that I'm paying attention to and the best articles I can find out there without compromising like new research I could be, sending to people or finding. But the reason I started the newsletter, or the thing that fascinates me the most about this space is, I mean, to be quite honest, I'm pretty agnostic to the technology. I'm not somebody, I know a lot of people who are in the crypto news space or crypto space in general because they're really technical. They fell in love with the technology. They're fascinated by it, and they're really interested by it, which is super legitimate. But I don't. That is not my initial passion for it, or I don't even know if I could say I have a passion for it. What I'm most interested in is how people are reacting and using it. That's what fascinated me the most, and it's not so much crypto as much as the community around crypto, and how that's been evolving, and how there's these extremes of terrorist groups and white supremacists using crypto to people in Venezuela and Argentina like preserving the value of their personal funds through cryptocurrency, and how you can just see through this one technology both the extreme dangers of it and also the extreme freedom and great things it can do for people. That dichotomy is really fascinating to me, and I think it is really unique to this technology, bar internet. There's not really something else that you could see as a tool that has such extreme great uses and not so great uses. Um, and so when I do this research, I definitely try to look at it either what's the most interesting recent way I've found of people using crypto, or what at a macro level or like the trends that are going on over people using it. So I predominantly am most interested in nation states oftentimes and how they're using it. Like I've been following China's recent blockchain developments, the technicalities over how to frame their burgeoning digital currency is kind of controversial because it is definitely not going to be something that you could open source look at online easily. It's not going to be on like a pure blockchain at all. It's going to be completely government controlled. But the fact that this world power is so interested in crypto, in a reaction to this giant tech company, Facebook, coming about with Libra, that is what kind of started with China coming forward with all of its, digital currency efforts. That relationship was fascinating to me, just to see how both it's kind of showing how, a company like Facebook is almost like a nation state in its own right, if it's going to be soliciting that type of response from a full country, but also that we're at the beginning of seeing this technology go into it's like a glimpse into the future of how money and the economy is going to be coming more and more online that like a giant country with billions of people like China is looking to phase out physical cash altogether.
Well, and to your point, there's an interesting chain reaction where Facebook takes it seriously, so then China takes it seriously, and then everyone else starts taking it seriously because China's taking it seriously. That creates almost a peer pressure effect amongst states to, in this case, keep up with a company, but then anticipate what China, with all of its resources and economic might be doing as well.
Exactly. And that's fascinating. And oh, sorry.
Hopefully a brief interjection. One of the things you said that, Libra was almost, or Facebook was almost acting or having the gravitational effect of a nation state with what it did with Libra is a common recurring theme here. We talk about the end of the nation state. Jesse coined the term the network state.
I didn't. I just said it.
Okay, you picked up on that phrase. And there's this sort of like arc of thought where we think history has gone from the power structures of societies being organized around churches that gave way to the nation state, and now the nation state is giving way, and we don't know what it's giving way to, and we ruminate that we really hope it's not Facebook and Google, and we hope it's or China, and we hope it's something else. But I was going to ask if you could expand on something you said or clarify, because you mentioned something about a relationship between Facebook, Libra, and China. Did you mean relationship in a sense of one's actions impelled the others, or is there an actual technology supplier relationship between Facebook's Libra and China? Like, I just haven't been following it close enough. The way Google supplies search engine technology to China with Dragonfly, is there a similar kind of a relationship with Facebook? Or did you just mean it in more sort of like this set this in motion kind of thing?
Right, I meant it's like a cause and effect type
Okay,
of thing.
all right.
There's not, yeah, I mean, I'm going to go out, like, everything I've read online and everything I know online is no, like, if anything, Libra and China's digital currency are, like, rivals in this space right now, and they're definitely, like, fighting with each other on it. I think that,
it's season 2 of Mr. Robot, or season 3 of Mr. Robot, who's, is it Evil Coin, or is it, anyhow? I don't know if you're familiar with, you may not be familiar with that series, but.
No, I should. And I had friends in college who were obsessed with it, and so I've been meaning to watch it. But how I look at the Libra China relationship is that China had been working on a digital currency quietly for a bit and had been interested in, for lack of better terms, blockchain technology, which again is kind of controversial for China to say that they're interested in blockchain technology, because the aspects of something that makes it blockchain technology, which is that it's censorship resistant, it's something anybody can access, blah, 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 everybody houses all this open source information about it. That is not what China is after at all. That is not what will be government blockchain products that China produces will not look like that. But they're a giant country in which most of the people don't use cash. So it made sense to try to make a transition from having a physical fiat currency to a digital yuan. Logically, that makes sense, but there's also big geopolitical implications for it, which is, as the online world becomes more and more online, for lack of better terms, the first country that can really dominate that space monetarily could have a lot of leverage, in theory. That's, the theory and hopes. Libra, separately was, Facebook was creating its own digital currency of sorts. And when it publicly announced it, all of a sudden that had China come forward and be like, oh, wait, we're working on this too, and, here's our plan and that type of stuff. And so they've kind of been rivals or butting heads since, and, having Mark Zuckerberg in Congress, when Congress had him come and testify about the, implications of Libra, how, they both kind of paint each other as the bad guy in this, I don't even know what to call it, like tiff battle or whatever it is. But yeah, it's definitely not a symbiotic relationship, and I don't that they're not like in cahoots or anything like that.
But you also, the point about infrastructure, I think, is important in that there is, I think, a general belief that whoever builds a system, especially a system that's interoperable and easy to use, there isn't necessarily a need to build a second system. And I think that was the initial fear of Facebook, that if Facebook took the concept of Bitcoin and the concept of blockchain and made a corporate version that was sanitized and a little more saleable for the general marketplace, they could literally create a global financial system that competes with the banks, competes with nation states. And so part of what I'm hearing in terms of your description of China's response is that that's the opportunity they see. That if China could create the global digital infrastructure for easy payments, for easy transactions, for sending money around the world instantly and securely and seamlessly, that has a chance to dislodge the US dollar as kind of the currency of record or the currency of the global financial system. Do you have a sense of what other governments are doing now that China has sort of stated its ambitions or at least set its own goals?
Yeah, now every central bank for every country in the entire world, not every, a lot have since in the following months come forward being like, oh, we're looking into creating a digital currency now, or, a centrally backed digital currency or whatever. So it's set off a ripple effect for sure of people taking people as in not people as in nation states. Sorry, haven't had coffee yet, but it has set off this ripple effect of having governments have to look at crypto or the potential for having a digital currency specifically, which again, when you get into the weeds of it and when you talk to, really nitty gritty crypto people, there are people who would say, well, state-backed currency isn't really a cryptocurrency, or, like there's a lot of minutia in that, that it can get complex. But the fact of the matter is that this has set off a ripple effect of digital currencies becoming a potential reality for a ton of countries. And I think what I predict will happen is once China's digital yuan releases or whatever, in the following weeks or months, we're going to see this onslaught of other, countries coming forward with their prototypes or whatever of digital currency to see what's going to happen there. It's definitely like a mini space race in some ways, how I look at it. I think that the reason why people are so interested in this is because other people are interested in this. I think that when, in 2000, in the early, or like, I guess I don't even know what to call it, like in 2009, 2010, 2011, when this technology was newer, countries were not really paying it any mind unless it for like a national security threat of like, oh, or, criminals going to be using this. And now it's becoming more and more mainstream as the months go by, and, it's standing a legitimate chance of becoming part of mainstream everyday use. But there's nuance to it, because digital currencies that the US government would issue or the Chinese government or issue, whatever, is not in its pure form a cryptocurrency, right? Like they're not going to have this completely, not to try to equate the US government to an authoritarian state, because that's not what I'm trying to do. But what I'm trying to say is when there is a central agency, entity, whatever, issuing a token or any sort of monetary value, that first off takes away the decentralized nature of how crypto is distributed amongst like a network of people. So if there's only one country, one entity, one main person doing that, that's a big difference in crypto. And the other thing is, the question of will there be a ledger, a public ledger of all these transactions? And that's not probably going to be the case for any country that releases a digital currency of its own. They're not going to give access to, behind the scenes of where money is going in and out for the entire country. So
Well,
there's
and I think, sorry, I think you're raising a really fascinating, which is, I'm curious to have you speculate on what you think that Venn diagram is, where on the one hand you have a pure cryptocurrency, and on the other hand you have a central digital currency. You know, what are they in common, and to what extent is the central digital bank, the state-based one, a farce? Like, to what extent is it, pale in comparison? Or, am I wrong to think that it would be inherently inferior to a network-based or a distributed currency? Like, is that a bias on my part, or or do these nation states, are they missing something when it comes to leveraging the potential of this technology?
Can I interject something really quickly? I think following on Jesse's point, I never call the government ideas around this a cryptocurrency. I always call them digital currencies for exactly the reasons we're talking about here. And the big distinction that I always promulgated was that in a government issued digital currency, you will not have your own private keys. And that's what defines a cryptocurrency, is you have your private keys. And that's part of what makes it decentralized. You brought up another great point that I hadn't considered, which is the blockchain aspect of it. That's the other thing that makes the cryptocurrencies unique and special, and what generated a lot of excitement around them was that transparency of the blockchain. And governments today, if we know anything, transparency is kind of anathema to them. So I would say,
although, I mean, let's be clear, because transparency, the public is one thing, but transparency between government departments, right, might be something that I think in and of itself could be revolutionary to government, especially authoritarian government, if the silos within government could talk to each other because they're sharing the blockchain. So I think that's why I'm curious where this Venn diagram overlaps, because there's lots of potential for it to overlap in different places.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that I ponder, and I don't know if I have. And I think it depends on who you talk to. I think that there would be people who, disagree with my take on it. And it's also, it's kind of like looking into a crystal ball. Like, we don't really know how it's going to play out. But I think that your perspective of it being, or of a digitally backed currency issued from a government being inferior to crypto is definitely fair. It's just depending on what aspects you're looking at, or what your goal is as a user or as a developer with the currency. Like, I think we have to remember the motivations of these governments when they're working with this technology. So if I'm a country or a nation state, what I'm most interested in is not necessarily the censorship resistant aspects of crypto. It's not necessarily any of the decentralized aspects of it either. But what is appealing to me is it's already a built-in framework of how to store stuff online in a massive way where it might not be decentralized outside of government, but it could be decentralized within government. And I know for, in fact, the case in China, that's a big reason why they're trying to, cherry pick different aspects of blockchain technology, which is that their government enterprise is sprawling, it is disorganized, and it is bureaucratic. It's also very effective and powerful in other ways too, but it's something that blockchain offers an opportunity to help organize public records, to help, streamline different storage entities or that type of stuff, and to be able to keep track of not only currency, but it could also have larger use cases for just like general information in general, or like general information storage, record storage, that type of stuff, in a pretty secure fashion. I mean, because there's not the decentralized aspect of it, because technically one entity would have control of the entire quote unquote network, that, a lot of crypto or cryptography purists would say that compromises the censorship resistance or the security of a network fully. But for an entity that doesn't want that information to get out and that wants to be the only one that controls it, like that's a really compelling aspect of crypto, or of not crypto, but blockchain technology. And, you know, I think that that's also kind of the issue with this in mind, is that when people who know a lot about blockchain or who know a lot about crypto, or even know more than the average person, will look at these use cases, they'll be like, this isn't crypto, this isn't a cryptocurrency, or this isn't a blockchain use case at all. This is like one or two aspects of it, if that. Like it seems all very odd and kind of like a glorified database, which, like, you know, maybe like we've seen enough ICO scams that they're not actually blockchain backed at all, and that type of stuff. But how I look at it is that blockchain technology through like Bitcoin, for example, or whatever, has made a convincing enough case that it's like a framework that could be useful and applied to these larger states, but they're going to be cherry picking what they use from it. They're not, you know, nerds like us who are really, you know, interested in the finer details and learning the aspects of what makes something a crypto or a blockchain or whatever. They don't care about that. They want to take whatever will be most useful to them and their enterprises or whatnot and apply that.
Well, and I think that's a brilliant point in terms of, you know, we take for granted that innovation doesn't always work the way you want. That if you're an artist, your audience is not going to interpret your art the way you want it. And I think while there are purists in the crypto community who want their baby, who want their child to grow up as they desire, if, you know, a sugar daddy like China comes and offers the kind of money and resources to take their ideas in a new direction, there's
not just China.
And
I mean, sorry, I jumped in, but that's why I think Facebook's announcement sent shockwaves everywhere, because they already had this global infrastructure where they could cherry pick to Brenna's point, what you're talking about. They could cherry pick the things that make it frictionless and liquid, and it's right there in your account, and they could like get rid of the stuff that the Bitcoin and the crypto purists like. And the thing about Bitcoin and Ethereum especially, like my work with the Ethereum name service working group, I was like, can you guys maybe make it even more complicated to register a domain name? Because I don't think it's complicated enough, and I can't even figure it out. And I mean, what people really want, the jaded business guy in me realizes, they want PayPal for Bitcoin. And to get PayPal for Bitcoin, you have to take out all of these anti-censorship, privacy things that make Bitcoin Bitcoin, and what you're left with is, if not China's digital yuan, then Facebook's Libra or something like it. And that's why, to your point, Jesse, it kind of goes it's why it's got VHS instead of beta.
But here's where I'm cautiously optimistic. As someone who has never been a Bitcoin blockchain purist, I've always seen myself as curious, as fascinated by it. But, you know, I always felt that there was a politics missing from the economics of Bitcoin that China does, right? China says, we have a politics, we have an ideology, we have a way in which we want to, the Communist Party and the Politburo, that we want to run things. So we're going to take from this technology the stuff that matches our politics, that matches our ideology. And there's a part of me inspired by that, because now the opportunities for a democratic society to do the same, for a democratic society to look at all the technology, to say, maybe we will keep the censorship resistant, but we're also going to make it accessible so that you don't need to have gigabytes of space to be able to download the ledger to still become part of it. And I think that's where, you know, Facebook gave us the corporate version, China gave us the authoritarian version. So now we need the democratic version, right? Now we need the Barcelona or the Amsterdam or the Canada or the whatever fictitious Rojava in Western Syria, whatever fictitious democratic republic to go, yes, we want to, because Brenna's point about bureaucracy I also thought was brilliant. right? China has a sprawling bureaucracy that they probably don't even understand. It's so sprawling. And so then to use distributed technology as a way to link up that sprawling bureaucracy to itself, it provides another interesting opportunity that a democratic society, here's an example, the Tibetan government in exile, right? The Tibetan government in exile is this fascinating self-governing diaspora of Tibetans outside of Tibet. And, you know, they, while based in Dar es Salaam, India, they are spread out all over the world. You know, this type of distributed currency, political system combined would be very valuable and relevant to such a network state. So that's where I'm, while a little disturbed by Facebook and China's efforts, I'm actually sort of inspired by the idea that the blockchain orthodox can't control the technology, but instead, because it's open source, it can evolve with culture and society in newfound ways. That's partly why I'm interested in who else is on board, what other countries, what other ideas, what other companies are thinking about the ways in which they can use these currencies in new ways.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying is also just, it's already present in the space. Actually, the best case study to look at is Venezuela. Venezuela technically launched its own digital currency. It technically was the first. It was, can I swear on the show? Is that not allowed? Is that?
We invite it. Go ahead.
The Petro, Venezuela's digital currency was a shit show, and it doesn't work, and it's a mess. But crypto is huge in Venezuela because, you know, on Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever, like, you can preserve the value of your, you know, money there more than you could if you just left it in the economy to go where it's just going to be deflating and deflating and deflating. And so you see both and also in Venezuela, there's other aspects where it's like, there's a lot of electricity there. So like electricity is really cheap there. So like mining crypto is like actually a really more doable than you would think, and profitable for somebody who, you know, needs money now to feed their family, etc. So there's this burgeoning ecosystem where you see this extreme of like this authoritarian state trying to control crypto and trying to have one type of this technology that people use, and then people using, you know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, different open source, globally accessible tokens to help themselves and to, you know, it's a radical act in some ways. And so I would not be surprised at all if we start seeing these more formal conglomerates of like creations of tokens or coins in a similar manner, besides, you know, people using, like, if human rights groups or stuff like that decide to try to create a token or a crypto to, you know, advocate for people around the world or that type of stuff, like, that's definitely, I think, a probability in the future in some way. But the other thing I think about is just then, like, why not just use Bitcoin? Like, why not use the purest form possible if you're somebody who does not want to have to trust any one central entity with your money? If you just want to be able to make sure that it is in its purest form, like, you know, crypto in some ways can be traceable, but, like, you know that the money that you're sending to various people over the Bitcoin blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, that's not going to be something that most likely can be intercepted by, you know, a government or another body or that type of stuff. And when you're somebody in dire situations like many Venezuelans are, that's invaluable.
Well, and that raises an interesting question or dynamic, that when the Venezuelan government introduces this system, thinking that it'll give them the upper hand, it actually ends up giving greater agency and potential autonomy to the people that they were trying to deny that to. And it makes me wonder, on a larger kind of meta scale, is Bitcoin the ultimate beneficiary here, right? As Facebook, as China, as other companies and countries wade further into this technology, the byproduct is they're raising awareness of the broader genre to the public. Does that then increase more just sort of root and look at the bottom and go, well, why would I go with these posers when I could go with the real deal? Is there a broader dynamic of whether Bitcoin or Ethereum is kind of the cool kids Bitcoin? Is there a dynamic in which these are being reinforced by all this broader activity at the state or corporate level?
Can I jump in for 1 second? I mean, so I was going to ask, where is Bitcoin's role in all this as we were leading up to this, and then the last couple, we've been covering that. And what I realize as one of the guys that pays more attention to economics and finance here, and we're talking about eventually people in economics and finance, it's not necessarily spoken in polite company, but the reality is the US dollar is not going to be the world reserve currency forever, and the big question in the air is what comes next. And gold purists say it'll be gold, and I think they're wrong, and crypto people think it'll be Bitcoin, and I think they'll be wrong. I think it will be some kind of basket or hybrid with government created digital assets and currencies. It's just kind of almost seems faded. But I'm going somewhere with this. Among all the Austrian economists, purists, etc., they look at all these fiat currencies and they say, yeah, this is all great. I'm going to use it to fill up my car with gas and buy groceries. But the one true money is gold. And they sort of measure everything against gold. And they do charts of the Dow against gold. And I think the same thing could happen with digital and cryptocurrencies, where these governments like Venezuela, great example. They come out with the Petro. The last time I checked the Petro website, it wasn't even working anymore. But then the second last time, it was working the last time I checked it a few days ago. And then the Venezuelans just say, this is not an effective currency for us, and it's more economically viable for them to feed their family to just mine Monero or Litecoin or Ethereum or whatever. And we will have the same dynamic where people will say, okay, there's corporate and government digital currencies and hybrids of the two, and the gold standard to which all of this will be pinned or compared will be Bitcoin, I think, and any other pure cryptocurrencies that stand the test of time. I think Ethereum will, I think Monero will, I think Litecoin will, and there's probably a couple of others that some people listening might be upset that I'm not mentioning them, but
well, Dogecoin for sure.
Doge for absolute sure. Yeah.
Brenna, what do you think?
No, I think that's an excellent point. I definitely could see, I agree that I don't think that Bitcoin is going to be this globally ubiquitous currency that we will be paying for coffee with in 10 years. But I do think that if there is a digital currency, how I could see, I think that's a really good point about how it would be like how we consider when we're looking at any sort of like fiat currency. Now we compare it to gold, or we used to compare it to gold. And I think that that's exactly what's going to happen with Bitcoin. Because even now when you see if anybody creates a new currency or a new token or whatever, the metric that they go off of is Bitcoin. Not even the dollar, not even gold, it's Bitcoin to compare it to. I think that's a really astute point. I think that that's more likely than not going to be the case. And I think the reality too is, it's going to be some sort of hybrid of, pure aspects of this technology that people love, and then aspects of this technology that is not part of the native type. I'm not making any sense. Sorry, I haven't had coffee, but
no, I know what you mean. I mean, I think personally, and I don't mean to assume what you're saying, but I don't think governments are ever going to get religion in terms of transparency, in terms of censorship, in terms of personal freedom. It's just not how they're hardwired. So they will take what they can use, they will leave the rest. And so what we've been saying earlier on is what you're left with isn't really a cryptocurrency, it's a digital currency. But I think there will always be, I think what Bitcoin has done, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. It has opened a new era of competitive platform even competitive currencies. So that, again, in the Venezuelan case, they came out with the petro, and it tanked because it couldn't outcompete Bitcoin. But to Facebook's point, I've always said, imagine if Libra got off the ground and became entrenched. People's Facebook account would be more relevant to their day-to-day lives than their government-issued passport in many places, because they would be getting paid in Libra.
That's true already.
Yeah. Yes.
Unfortunately,
I know.
But I mean, we're running out of time, and we are standing between Brenna and her coffee. So I
know.
We will wrap soon, but I kind of feel it's important to tease out one last insight that I felt both of you were touching upon, which is the open source aspect of all of this, right? That Bitcoin is open source, that cryptocurrencies are open source, and there is an iterative development. There is an innovation at work there is entirely what's enabling these companies and countries to do what they're doing, because they can stand on the shoulders of giants when it comes to the open source stuff. So if we sort of step back and look at the larger picture, I sort of have two questions for both of you, quite frankly, in response to that. Number one, does this mean that there'll be more shit coins, or will there be a consolidation? Will we look back at the early days of cryptocurrency with all of these coins as being the early days when there were lots of railroads, because anyone could run rails, but inevitably there was consolidation and they were reduced to the tiny few? Same happened with telephone companies and internet companies and so on and so forth. The second question about open source, and we've alluded to this, but I kind of want to press this a little with both of you. We talked about how governments are not going to be transparent, right? How part of their cherry picking is they want some of the resilience of the technology, not the transparency. So what about open source? As these companies as these countries start using open source tools, especially as part of their digital currencies and their digital infrastructure, will that, whether deliberately or accidentally, flow back into the open source world? Right? Will some of the advancements made by governments investing and working on this technology kind of cross-pollinate back into the repositories and general code? Because it strikes me that governments are benefiting from all these open source efforts. Will open source efforts benefit from government developments? There's a part of me that thinks, yes, inevitably, that there's no way to prevent that. But I'm curious what you guys think, both in terms of, will there be a plurality of currencies because anyone can create a currency, and will the world of open source be strengthened and empowered by more governments appropriating open source tools, even if they're not doing so with the full spirit and ethos of open source as a whole?
If I may jump in and answer first, and then Brenna, you can take us home out of this, because my answer is short. To number one, I think the proliferation of shit coins is like penny stocks. All right, so there may be eras in time when there are more or less, but they're always there, and there's always someone, because it is open source, there's always going to be players saying, perhaps genuinely motivated, we think we have something unique and we can make a go of this, or it's a joke, like Dogecoin, or Wow Nero is my favorite. I love Wow Nero. And or outright scams, people just creating Ponzi's. I don't have an answer to the second one, so that's why I can kick it over to Brenna, because I haven't really thought about it enough.
Yeah, I agree with Mark's take on the first one. I think that I think that there will be an aspect of consolidation where, in 2017 or so, there was this big boom of if you had a fake ICO scan, you could be really successful with it. And I think the days of being able to, scam people with that are dwindling somewhat, but that doesn't mean it's going to just completely die out and that people are just not going to be able. And now we're seeing crypto scams perpetuating, the big Twitter hack that happened a month or so ago, and different stuff like that. Like I think there will always be evolutions of people using crypto in scammy ways, whether that is because they are creating their own tokens or because they are utilizing existing technologies. Um, that's just, I think the answer to Jesse's first question is like yes and no. There will be some sort of consolidation where the main digital currencies that are usable will probably be, a handful, but that won't stop the larger ecosystem from still perpetuating, like Mark said, penny stocks and different scams, or even using the consolidated handful to perpetrate scams. That's just not going to go away. I don't see that going away. To the second point, also like Mark said, I haven't thought about it a lot either, but my mindset is that, to us, I think that we think crypto is this big news topic that everybody's talking about and everybody pays attention to if you're interested in technology. But I don't actually think that's necessarily the case globally or for the average Joe. And so what I think could happen is that the more and more these quote unquote mainstream government digital currency initiatives happen, more and more people are going to begin to like learn and understand about digital currencies in general. And not everybody, but then some people will then trickle into understanding, well, what's a cryptocurrency then, and where are the differences, and how is this technology going? Like, I think for me, my mindset in some ways with crypto is that, like, the more regular people or the more people that can get access or have, some sort of inkling or prompt to learn more about it, the more that could inspire new developments. But I don't know. And I also don't know if that is even what would happen, because, if people see how like say open source developers see that one digital token is really useful, or like I think if somebody sees that somebody can create a technology that they didn't think they could before, if they could create an aspect of a digital token that, people didn't think was possible before or whatever, if people know something's possible, then they know that there's a way to do it and they'll figure it out eventually. And that it's the same for open source developers as well. So like if they see some, nation or like, national digital token like becoming really advanced in some aspect, then they know it's possible to advance in that aspect and they can figure it out in that way too. Like I think that, imitation is the highest form of flattery, and if people know what they can imitate, then that always leads to innovation as well.
Well, and I think that's actually, it's funny you raise that, because I think that speaks to the paradox that China faces. Because on the one hand, I think that their resurgence as a global power is because they reverse engineered everyone else's technology. And now that they're at the front of the pack and they're developing their own technology, they should assume everyone's going to just sit right back. Everyone's going to reverse engineer anything that they invent. To your point, once we know it's possible, someone else is going to figure out how to reproduce it or how to reverse engineer it or how to make it possible. So I think that gives me at least a glimmer of hope that there is still an opportunity to think about the way this technology works from democratic means, from the kind of grassroots means, in contrast to the authoritarian, in contrast to the top down. Because while a recurring theme of this podcast is our collective paranoia that some authoritarian regime is rising, about to take over, where I always see the silver lining that, I think Brenna alluded to earlier indirectly, is most dictatorships are incompetent, right? Most authoritarian powers are overwhelmingly bureaucratic and corrupt. They often don't work. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And that's where I think we have to remember that, there is no future, there is no fate. It's our curiosity, I think, that influence we're able to do tools and technology we have. So with that, thank you, Brenna, very much for coming on as a guest on the show. I learned a lot, and I thought this was a fascinating discussion that really gets into the idea that the the relationship between technology and politics, the relationship between technology and governments is while fascinating, is still really quite complicated and worth pursuing. So I think all three of us as researchers independently do so. So it was fantastic that we could come together and have this conversation. Mark, any last thoughts or comments?
I was just going to say, echo what you said, and Brenna, if you want to tell people how to get onto your newsletter and where to access your material, feel free.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. The quickest and easiest way to find me would be on Twitter. My handle is Brenna, BRENNA _Smith, SMITH. The Brenna with one underscore, the just straight Brenna Smith, has still not given up their username, but they have both been inactive for years. So hoping
that.
one day. I know. So I have the weird double underscore for my name, and then I have a link in my bio to sign up for the newsletter there.
Okay.
Right on. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. That was okay. Thanks. And then I think starting next week, we might have Charles back on the show to get the band back together. So we'll see you all next week. And that was Axis of Easy Salon number 20.